Happy Thursday. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out today in your finest PJs to your laptop and your couch, hopefully staying warm and cozy if you're in places that are normally warm and cozy, and you're staying cool in places that are normally quite chilly right now. DC, I don't know how you stole South California's weather, but bravo, well done. We are here today for a fantastic webinar. I'm going to be joined by the fantastic Chris Nichols, and we are going to give away all of Google's patented trademarks. Dun, dun, dun. Actually, our agenda today is we're going to have a really great conversation, fireside chat style. But during this, I encourage you, go ahead and ask questions. We're here to answer them, because after our fireside chat, we're going to go ahead and go through your questions, try and give you meaningful answers to, well, how to implement this crazy world of SEO best practices and processes, particularly at scale. With that, let me introduce our guest of honor. Hi, Chris. How's
Hello.
it going?
It's going well. Rather cold, though. Still cold out in the north.
Well, you knew what you signed up for. You are in Vermont?
I am.
Yeah. You can't really be surprised. Like, you move there and you're like, what's this? There's snow and maple syrup? No one warned me.
I did move here. I was not originally raised in Vermont. I did relocate in my early 20s.
I heard you were born for automotive. You were actually born in like a Chevy factory or something. Is that true?
Actually, I was born in Hershey, Pennsylvania, so more chocolate based.
Hershey Park, the
yes.
world's lamest theme park.
Yep. However, I have worked in automotive in some capacity since I was probably 15 years old, whether it be like working at Jiffy Lube or car dealerships, and then later on in my career getting into the digital space.
So what do you do now? How did you end up here? Who are you? Have we just met? It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, so now I'm a senior manager of SEO at Cox Automotive. I've been with the company about 9 years. I actually started my journey with Cox on the dealer.com side, working on dealership websites. I did that for about 5 years. And then I made the transition over to enterprise probably like mid 2018. And now I have a focus more on the technical side of SEO for both AutoTrader, Kelley Blue Book. We have a couple of specialty sites, motorcycles.autotrader and RVs.autotrader and whatnot. And then we also focus, we most recently started focusing on the platform for dealer.com. So that's another 13,000 or so websites.
Wait, 13,000 websites?
Correct.
And I'm assuming each one of these websites has more than 5 pages.
Yes.
So how many pages are you looking over in this grand automotive landscape?
Too many to count.
Isn't that comforting? Because if I understand it right, it's a non-stop changing inventory of cars that are listed across all of these, and you have to keep track of them without manually making pages for every one of them.
Correct.
So we're looking at millions of cars.
Yeah, so KBB and AutoTrader combined are probably 20 million pages, just those two sites.
But it's all dynamically done. You are working with React-based frameworks on sites that are constantly changing, and you've got to put out functions that are meant to work across all of them, but not too well or too bad or make too many unintended URLs. So the landscape you're looking at is not only vast, constantly changing, but has a tendency to exist. These things are moving so quickly that what's there one day is gone the next.
Yeah, and being able to do that at scale is really important to the business. Because like you said, if we could touch, one page, and next thing you know, we're screwing with or messing with, 100,000 or 1 million pages at once. So we got to have, some caution when we're doing it, a lot of oversight, a lot of testing, just to make sure we're not incorrectly or pushing out something that we don't want to.
So this brings us to like the first thing I really want to talk to you about. What does it look like to be the senior manager of enterprise SEO and product management? What does not only a day-to-day look like, but your team structure?
Lots of meetings. So I have a team that reports up to me. I report to the director of SEO, at Cox Automotive. And, my team specifically is more focused on the technical side of things. So listings. We also do forecasting for the company, data science. What else is there? The service and repair business. So we have people that are specialized in each one of those areas, right? We don't have anybody that's really a generalist SEO. We have people that are very specific in their discipline. So we have one person that oversees listings. We have one person that oversees service and repair. We have one person that oversees the data. And each one of those people work with a product manager, product owner that oversees the Scrum teams to help get the changes pushed through. So it's not like a traditional SEO where you have to touch the site every day and you're making all those technical changes yourself. Like we work very, very closely with a number of Scrum teams across the business to implement the changes that we need across all the different React pages.
Oh, wow. So it's almost like your SEO team is made of individual site section owners. Like that's their responsibility, and they are working collaboratively with a respective product owner and that Scrum team that's the product owner is managing.
Correct. Yep. And we even sometimes we go through like discovery phases. So there's product owners and product managers. Product managers really like what's coming next down the pipe. Like what do we need to look at for future implementation? So that way we don't fall behind, right? We want to make sure that we can see almost into the future what's going to be coming down from Google, the algorithmic changes, or even within the automotive space in and of itself, right? It's changing rapidly. So we have to be in front of that to make sure that when we bring things into delivery, that they're buttoned up, they're really sound, and they're going to be valuable for consumers.
Okay, I barely have time to read the non-client Slack channels. You're saying your team members, do they actually have time to go do this themselves? Is it designated to one person to take that baton and, go nerd out reading the latest Google documentation or buzz in associated industries? Again, I have no time to check the channel. Yeah. And it's full of cute puppies and kittens, and I don't have the bandwidth.
Yeah, so we all do it. We're a bunch of nerds at the end of the day that, we love what we do. So, to go and read the Google documentation to me, it's not a task, right? It's something I personally enjoy doing. So I don't mind reading a patent or trying to
especially when it's a diagram, you're like, oh.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, I mean, we're really trying to transform the way consumers buy cars. And, when you look at it from a business standpoint, we're helping a business and we're helping consumers to change something globally, right? So it goes beyond like yourself of like, oh, hey, I got to read this one blog or this one article or this technical documentation. So when I boil it down to those micro moments, that's the stuff that I really enjoy. But then when you look at it holistically and what you're doing, you get pretty excited about it and it just makes you want to dig in more.
So spoilers here, audience, I hate to inform you, but there's a bit of an inside relationship that was been going on because I actually have the privilege of working with Chris through Deepcrawl on Cox, and it's the most amazing collaborative experience to work with these individual teammates. And y'all have become one of my favorite teams because of that sense of, I found a cool thing, I'm going to share it with my teammates. Or can you just help me go down this rabbit hole? I need a second set of eyes, because I feel like a lot of SEO work is a moment of going, I figured it out, I'm brilliant, or I might be smelling burnt toast. I'm a little worried. I'm going to go find another human because I haven't been outside in 4 days. How do you foster such a great collaborative team? because it's more than just going and you have to work with a PO. That's not how your team interacts.
And you add the layer of not being in the office and everyone's remote now. It definitely not easy. But when we bring people on, like we really want to make sure that, they fit the culture, and, we really nurture that. And collaboration is something that we thrive on. We all understand that we have weak spots, right? And that's not a fault, right? I mean, there's always something that somebody can learn. But when you surround yourself with really smart people and
have great team Halloween costumes.
Yeah,
we all had the best.
The SEO team actually won the internal Halloween costume contest last year. A little aside, we all dressed up as the Google algorithmic updates, but we took it to the real world. So for Maverick, I dressed up as Maverick from Top Gun. So
there was a bird, a hummingbird, there was a panda. It was. We should share that out after this. So we know your team is great, but going outside of your team and interacting with stakeholders and executives to get buy-in. Let's talk about that at the scale you're having to work at. Yeah,
so we don't traditionally sit inside of marketing, SEO traditionally sits in a marketing field. We actually sit in product. So we interact directly with, the executive leadership team daily. And making sure that they have the information needed to help us make the right decisions is crucial. And it's not just about saying hey, I want to do this one project over here. I think it's going to do well. But it's we go through user testing. We also track consumer value or value events on the site. So we know what a value per visit looks like. So when we start looking at that and the traffic that we're getting, it's really easy for us to say, if we need to allocate resources, say we want to look at bringing on a Scrum team.
Which is not a cheap thing. You're not asking for $5,000 for a SaaS subscription.
No, and even bringing on a tool like Deepcrawl, right? It all goes through a similar process. And we'll just use some, some random numbers. So if I know I want to try to ask for a Scrum team, right? I know it's going to cost them about $1 million. And if the value per visit is $1, then I need to bring in an extra 84,000 visits a month to pay for that Scrum team. And now we start looking at how can we do more? Can we bring in more? So then we do the keyword research, and we do look at the competitive landscape. And then we start to really back into the numbers to see if we can make it work.
So you start with that value per visit and then go to how much it's going to cost. How many new page views going to generate, and then go, how can we achieve that? So it's a way of almost working backwards math to the tactical execution, as opposed to a lot of strategies that see people go, but I want to do this one thing, and never really getting to the math in their proposal. I've been in those marketing meetings. I've met you folks.
And some of the harder ones are when you're trying to do something new where there's no search volume, right? Some, cutting edge, product or something that you're introducing into a market that it's really hard to quantify, but then you can start backing into click-through rates, and you still know your value per visit, and your conversion rate to the next step. So it's a little bit more tricky to do, but it's still a good practice to walk through, or a good process, because once you can start showing the value of your work, where you could go, then it's a lot easier to get buy-in. And it also helps to have VPs and SVPs that have some level of SEO knowledge, that really help pioneer and give us the runway we need to push the work through.
I mean, it's impressive, and I've watched it work, and I've watched it work at a scale where, Scrum teams are millions, and we're talking billions of page views. Impressive and amazing, but how do you actually get these technical changes implemented?
Yeah, this is really where it comes down to each team member working with their product owner and the Scrum teams. So again, we don't touch the websites. There are some things that we can do here and there, but we generally don't touch the source code or the JavaScript. So we work as with an agile methodology. So we go through sprint cycles and planning and all that. So it's really like building out our backlog of what we need done, and then going into refinement to prioritize all that stuff and making sure that the Scrum teams and developers actually know what we're talking about, right? So it's one thing if you and I talk, SEO speak and all that stuff, but the developers don't necessarily know what you're actually saying. And vice versa, right? If somebody wants to start talking about C++, like I'm lost. So it's really getting in there and like breaking it down to terms that they can understand. But then I also notice on the flip side, going back to them after something's been implemented and showing them the progress, like it helps get them excited. And when they're excited, they want to really help you out and be part of that. So when you can create this excitement in the work, right, it's a lot easier to get things done.
We all want to do good things, and dev teams, when you can show them that graph is like, and there's what you did. There's a genuine sense of my work matters and I want to do more of it. This thing I'm doing is really cool and it makes a change. And I love building allies that way. I think we underestimate the power of sharing wins, sharing, you guys did good work. Here it is. Let's talk about this one at scale though. So you know the old joke, right? A group of lions is called a pride, and a group of ravens is called a murder, and a group of developers is called a merge conflict. How do you go ahead and make these SEO related changes at scale across all these teams and not have unintended collisions or gaps?
Yeah, so we have general best practices that we follow, right? We have certain rendering strategies that we abide by. We have certain, like, even coming down to like how things are lazy loaded on a page. But when it comes down to making sure things don't collide, each section is like is almost like an app. So there's only like a certain set of Scrum teams, and like we'll take service and repair for instance. There's only a certain Scrum team, and there's a certain PO, PM, and there's an SEO that work in that space. So it's really a little more streamlined that way, but our general principles still overarch across all Cox Automotive, right? So we say, like, we want the navigation rendered without JavaScript, right? If you turn JavaScript off, like, Google needs to be able to crawl that, and that's not something that we're willing to really flex on. There are things that we can really talk about, and sometimes there are some trade-offs, but it's also making sure that the acceptance criteria is correct, that we clearly state like exactly what's needed in every single feature or user story.
Tell me more. Tell me more about these user stories. An acceptance criteria? What's that?
Yeah. Like making sure you have a self-referential canonical when it's needed. Making sure pages are set to index, or if no index, if you want them not to be crawled. Or not crawled, but not indexed. So
don't believe a robot's TXT will save you, kids.
I know it's we've been through our share of let's no index this, then block it on the robot's file, but yet it's still in the index. How can we get pulled out? And so we've gone through that, and that process is down pat now. Like, we have that one nailed.
It seems like there's a framework across teams. But then the specialist who comes in and is going to be the one to help navigate beyond that baseline and perhaps negotiate with a larger organization when we have to make an exception here.
Yeah, and then everything goes through user acceptance testing, or we call it UAT. So we balance that against the acceptance criteria, right? So when something's getting ready to be merged live, like, did it hit everything in the acceptance criteria? And if it didn't, then we'll go back and we'll have some adjustments made.
So I'm going to take a minute here to talk about my favorite thing in working with Cox. And that is we have so many dynamic scripts and pieces going on in great teams, but sometimes we find things that aren't expected that are the output of dynamic scripts rendering. And a lot of the collaboration we have done has been based on using crawlers to check between the assumptions and what we expect code will do, and then what appears out in the wild, whether it's in Google's index and how we're seeing them hit us from server logs, or in the tool when we emulate that bot scampering on out and finding, oh, so a user would never see this URL, but these pieces combined create da 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 da. I think it's really cool. I love the game of its front end and React, and we're finding gaps in between, because if you think that you know exactly how your site behaves, you have not crawled it lately.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it means we get big wins. Like we find things that weren't easy to spot, but are really easy to fix.
Yeah. And, you know, a lot of credit to yourself and your team for finding like in the iframes in the head section. Just don't do it.
Protect the head. Don't decapitate your page.
Yeah. And it's hard when some of that stuff gets dynamically injected and you really don't see it.
Well, that was the case where it was a tag manager fire. So it's not even something that your team would see. And when they do their checks before release, they know their baseline. But that one snuck in client side.
Yeah, we got that ripped out really fast.
Impressive turnaround time. Like I am always blown away with how fast and effective your team is able to action. And I think a lot of SEOs out there feel frustrated. They're not able to go ahead and make those quick turnarounds. But it sounds like this framework you have and these relationships with developers and sharing good news is what makes a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, we work really, really closely with all the other teams, the developers, engineers, and other key stakeholders. So if something comes up that's like detrimental that we need to get fixed right away, generally we can get it done.
All right. Let's talk about prioritization. What is the hierarchy? Who gets the most cake between technical and content SEO?
Well, this is a fun question because we actually run these in parallel.
They don't have to compete?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, like myself and my team are focused on the technical. Like we also have a team that's focused on content. And that's a whole nother set of engineers and developers and editorial teams. So we can actually run these in parallel. If they were to compete, then we would go through a prioritization process.
Okay. So we have these content writers who are our content teams, content SEOs, who are empowered via built already available tools, CMS, widgets, gizmos aplenty. Your technical SEOs have Scrum teams, which are engineers dedicated to a particular section of the site or task process. They are managed by a product owner. So they have different paths that they go through. There's not necessarily a need to compete, but it sounds like based on, you talk about, I've got to find 84,000 new page views a month. I'm going to get keyword research. Does that mean that you collaborate with these content teams and work in tandem?
Oh, very much so. Because at the end of the day, it's still delivering, the best consumer experience possible, right? At an enterprise scale with as many pages as we have, crawl budget and technical factors are detrimental. Like you have to focus on that stuff. However, if you're going to try to build a new audience, right, you got to give them something. So we will collaborate with the editorial teams and make sure that we're putting something out at the same time, if that's the case, or depending on what the project is. But yeah, we try to do these in parallel. Right now we do. Usually there aren't times that they butt heads and we have to pick one over the other.
And I think the key is it's okay to butt heads, though. Just like come with data, don't take it personally. We all want to make good things. If we have that sense with our teams and can make meaningful language that translates from the C-level who wants they want the back of the book version of a Epic of Gilgamesh, as opposed to the devs who were like, if you send me another Neil Patel article that's all acronyms and all nonsense, like we've got to be able to pivot our communication here.
Yeah,
kind
and
of
that's
leads.
where I have to look at a holistic plan, right? It's not just about SEO at, sometimes at our level. It's definitely how does it fit into what the business is trying to achieve and what's best for the business at that particular time. And then, I work with, other counterparts and coworkers that we really try to figure out, like, in this one sprint, because we're not planning, more than 2 sprints in advance, like in this one sprint or 2 sprints, what's most important to the business and the consumer, right? And that's how we'll start to prioritize work.
I love this idea, and it's going to take us into this slide right here that talks about we are now at the best practices and top tips to achieve success section. But not planning 2 months ahead sounds like your team is set on being proactive. The backlog is not 9 months worth of tech deck tickets and promises made from hiring the last Scrum team in order to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we definitely go through a roadmap process where we'll, every November or so, and like in Q4, we'll be planning out for like the following year. And we will definitely say, okay, in Q1, we want to get, X, Y, and Z covered. Q2, Q3, Q4 is a little more light. But there are times where like you need to adjust those on the fly based off of what's happening, because let's be honest, like you can't predict what Google's going to do in 6 months. You don't even know what they're going to do tomorrow.
We work for one company, trying to appease another company. It is
Merry Christmas. We get an algorithmic update. Like,
or you get a global supply shortage of cars. You get strange and bizarre things that no one. If somebody mapped that out in Q4 a couple years ago, you need to go talk to them and have like a serious conversation and ask them lottery numbers or perhaps what other imminent doom they're predicting. Just give me a heads up. Subscribe to those updates.
Yeah, and we use a lot of data to help determine what we're going to do, right? So, we get the marketing reports, and we get quarterly car sales reports, so we know what the top selling cars are in each segment are. Then you get things like, that boat unfortunately caught fire in the ocean, and 4,000 vehicles were lost. That impacts dealerships in the States, right? What does that do to like supply? So you have these supply issues that are happening that are real, and then you have things that go up, like used car values have been climbing, right?
Yeah.
So you just kind of have to roll with it and do the best you can when you're like still trying to do what's right for the consumer.
Does that involve taking the individual SEOs who work beneath you and their initiatives with the PO, with the Scrum team, and changing those? Saying, hey, I know you were set on doing this, but I need you focusing here now.
Sometimes. Not all the times, but sometimes. And I also don't like to say like they work beneath me. We work together. It's definitely a team approach. And, I totally couldn't do what I do without them.
They are excellent humans, as are you. Before we wrap up this last top tips, I actually want to ask a question for myself. And I think it's one that we all occasionally have nagging in the back of our mind when we're being held accountable by the people who write our paycheck for something that a search engine did that we have no say or visibility into. How do you define SEO success?
I could go with the whole, it depends. We definitely have KPIs that we track, right? We track, value. And then we also track, visits and entries, like everybody else does. But we also have a forecast that we balance against. So, are we doing better today than we did yesterday? Like, are we making a difference, right? Are we providing more value to a consumer? Obviously, we all want more traffic, right? We all want that, that magic bullet that's gonna, give us tens of thousands of views tomorrow. But we have to look at long term, and sometimes we have to say like, this is going to take 3 months for Google to figure out. Uh, so we're definitely looking at how we did like daily last week, what our metrics look like compared to last month. In automotive, it's very much seasonal. So you have like all these, these buying trends that happen. So it's also getting ready for those. But at the end of the day, it's about providing value to the consumer. And that's, that's the first thing we look at, even above visits.
I love that idea of it's incremental. Success is it better today than it was yesterday? I think that's really important in a field that's always going to move and shift. Do you want to take some questions?
Sure.
That was yes, because my audio just decided to be a little bit cattywampus on me.
As will happen. If something can go wrong in a live webinar, my friends absolutely will talk and roll. It'll make your life fun. All right, Chris. We have one here from John Dingman. How do you effectively quantify a business value to potential SEO traffic and back up the data as reliable to make a business case?
Ooh, that's a good one. That goes back into like knowing what like the Scrum team costs, or knowing like you have to know like a value per visit number, right? And when you're trying to make a business case, and you could actually put a monthly or annual increase to that. So we'll just use another arbitrary number. Say your value per visit is, $2. And you're going to bring in an extra, 10,000 visits, or, you're trying to bring in an extra 10,000 visits. And those visits will give you then, what, $20,000 in value monthly, right? So then you take that and you multiply it by 12, right? And then you have your annual projection of what that traffic could look like. And that's the number we'll go off of, saying like when we're building out a business case on why we want to do something or how we're going to provide business value, is breaking it out by like, okay, what are we going to get from this traffic for the month, from this one project? And then what are we going to get for annually?
I love this idea of when you launch an SEO initiative, you have something to measure it by.
Yes.
It's a really effective way to get that buy-in across the devs and the stakeholders, get the money behind that.
Yeah,
I love.
I was going to quickly say, if you can't get like value per visit, and if you're running like an agency style, you can definitely take the amount of money that you charge monthly and divide that by leads. Right. And then you can start to say what cost per lead is, and you can start to, there's other ways to get to it mathematically. But it's always, you got to show that value in what you can potentially bring in.
So there's always some math there. There is a way. Sometimes we have to use the most simplest facts that we can, instead of trying to extrapolate out through essentially like a game of Plinko to get to a number, which I've never seen math that goes through the Plinko of causation end up being meaningful or help keep good standing across teams. It seems to undermine the integrity of well-intentioned efforts. I love this question. Huh?
Excel is my friend.
Share your data source, be transparent. Here's methodology. If your article, case study, whatnot contains methodology, I immediately love you. Please send me a link to it. I love this question from Jeannie Woods. How do you ensure that data is shared without data overload?
Without data overlap?
Overload.
Yeah,
you've opened too many Excel files. It is going poorly. You can bake cookies on your poor laptop.
I've done that. Bake the cookies on my laptop, that is.
I think we should make a cookbook. We call it SEO Cookies, Baked Goods for when you run crawls.
Yeah, when I'm sharing things with an executive level, like, yes, the file that I have is probably going to be big. But what I do is I try to think about like, what do they need, right? They need a high level, really quick glimpse of what it is, why it's beneficial, and what the next steps are. So what I do is I take the results that I want out of like a working document and put them just into like a summary document, and that's what I'll send. I won't send a big 20 meg file that has, hundreds of thousands of rows in it that we've been analyzing. I really just try to break it down into a really small, digestible format.
I love that idea of the summary, particularly when you can visualize it, when you can create something that's, and here's the chart, because C-levels are going to skim typically any email for about 15 seconds, and a good visual to grab them, a good summary, instead of being like, as you'll see with attached findings, we think that we all need new laptops because this file is 20 megs and half of my team has crashed their machines trying to open it.
And also another quick tip for that is, in your email, explain what is in the attachment really fast. Like I'll call it like executive summary. So they have the option, either they can open it or they don't have to open it, and they still get the information that they need.
So how do you create an SEO process at scale for a large site, but if you only have a small team?
It takes time. I'm not going to sugarcoat that one. It definitely didn't happen overnight for us. It takes a lot of time, a lot of buy-in. When you have a smaller team, like, you really have to be a little bit, I don't want to say a little bit more nimble, but you end up working a lot. I would say keep building relationships and
Allies. Yeah.
Where you can get other people to help you out with that information. Like, even if it's like asking people on Twitter, right? Like, if I'm stumped, I'll try to ask John Mueller if he wants to reply or not. If you say something about cheese, he's more likely to reply.
Cheese is a ranking factor. Yeah.
Yep. Cheese and dog pictures. He's definitely a dog.
Obviously.
But really try to think outside the box. Like, even if you have a small team, where else can you get the information quickly?
I've found making allies with other teams, like sometimes your powers combine. Yes. You can find common threads and initiatives and go, actually, if we sync these up, each of y'all have to do half as much work. We get twice the bang. And I'm just going to help you as an SEO make sure your work gets the oomph and the visibility it needs by providing some acceptance criteria. Friends. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of great resources out there that are good starting points. Like, if you don't have the time, you're trying to do it quickly. I would definitely do some research around stuff that already has processes built out. And then I would piggyback off that, and then, try to, whatever the company, define it by the company needs.
I absolutely adore this question here from John Dingman. And he's asking, what do you do when everything catches fire? When there is a catastrophe in your industry, like your boat, how do you scramble together and move very quickly to address whatever that issue can be?
Yeah, this is like one of those analogies that I always think of, where it's a duck in water, right? Above the water, everything's nice, calm, cool, collective, but below the water, their feet is moving a mile a minute. Mm. But then sometimes you also have to consider, if everything's a fire, nothing's a fire.
Yes, louder for the people in the back. If everything is priority one, then nothing can be priority one.
Yeah. So what I like to do personally is, when I feel like I have a lot going on that's really important, is I write it all down. Like, I handwrite things in my notebook, and then before I transpose them onto a more readable format, and then I start to prioritize. I'll even take a break away from my computer for a few minutes, to really start to think through what is truly important and where my attention needs to go first. Break it down by deadline, if something has to happen today or not today. And usually it's very unlikely that everything has to happen at once. Or if I can't get to something, it's really managing that expectation with whomever you're working with. So if I can't get to something today and I know it's going to take me, 2 more days, I'll proactively reach out to that person, but hey, this is the time I need, and this is why I need it. And usually it's fine.
So I have time for one last question. And I think this one is really handy, as we've talked a lot about the culture and the mentality, the simple math and process of how you're going through, setting expectations, setting goals, communicating. What tools do you use? Spoilers, we already talked about, you use Deepcrawl, but what other tools does a team like yours use to handle the chaos and cake that is a million cars?
So
20 million cars? My bad. I didn't mean to underestimate y'all.
I don't know if it's 20. It's a lot. So there's Deepcrawl. Then we use a rank tracking software. That's pretty much imperative. We use SEMrush, Ahref. I will say that we also use Screaming Frog to some extent for very small,
no shade. Good
for
work. Good
things,
team.
Right? And we were actually using that prior to Deepcrawl, and that's what almost blew up my computer. And it takes a week to that because you have to dial it all the way back down to 0. Anyways, we ended up putting
my computer survived Screaming Frog. Should be a sticker. You should be able to get that badge of honor. I would proudly rock that.
I've actually had the people here fixing my computer to put a new I forget what it is, new fans in. We've also put Screaming Frog in the cloud on an AWS server, so that way it doesn't run on a machine. But we have like the power of like 30 or 40 max against it, so it can run and not impact your processes. Excel's big. I love Excel. I know a lot of people don't like spreadsheets. I'm a huge spreadsheet junkie. Logs.io. Then there are some internal tools, obviously GitHub to manage some repositories, things like that. And then the basic, right? The Google Search Console, Bing Webmaster Tools.
Did you say your SEOs are in GitHub?
Yes.
I love that. I love the transparency and the communication. And it tends to seem a little bit intimidating to a lot of SEOs, but it's pretty approachable and a great way to be there as it happens. Be in the room where it happened.
And if you know JSON or JavaScript, it's really not that bad.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Chris. This is an absolute blast. I love getting dapper, nerding out, talking SEO at scale, chaos and cake. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it was my pleasure. And I'm sure there's probably a million other questions or whatever, but feel free to,
you're on Twitter. Could folks reach out to you?
They can totally reach out to me on Twitter. They can make it public. They can DM me.
What's your handle?
As I can. It's Chris Nichols SEO.
Chris Nichols SEO. Reach out, ask your questions. I'm at jammer_volts. And of course, this is at Deepcrawl. So message us, give us your feedback, ask more questions. Thank you for gifting us your time today. We love you. Have a wonderful week.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.